He could have been sentenced to 100 years behind bars, I understand. Does 25 seem lenient to you?
It seems about right to me, Marilla. I think what the judge did here is he looked at what the prosecution was asking, which was 40 to 50 years, and he looked at what the defense said, which was 6.5 years, and he said neither one of those is exactly correct. I do think 25 years is somewhat in the middle. It's reasonable. It's a long amount of time. It sets a good example for others who might think about committing fraud or conspiracy to commit fraud. And so I think Judge Kaplan came to the right decision. Now, we know he could get out somewhat earlier than that if, in fact, he has good behavior and there's a law that really says for these types of crimes, he can serve half the time. So I do think he'll be out in much less time.
Okay, he never really, I'm going to say, truly expressed remorse, and that is coming from the judge. I'm wondering how you would characterize his scheme and what you would compare it to.
Well, he expressed some remorse. He said he was sorry that this happened to the individuals. He is doing an appeal, and he has to be very careful what he says during that allocution to the court. He has to be sorry, but he can't admit to any crime. So I think he was walking a very thin line. I think his allocution was a bit rambling, but he did say he was sorry. So I don't think that during that time period he should have said, look, I was guilty and I am really sorry for all of the crimes I committed, because it would make his appeal that much more difficult. But Judge Kaplan did mention that when he gave the sentence, he did want to see more remorse. And you can understand that when there is a trial and a jury comes to a verdict and the verdict is guilty, when the judge does the sentencing, the judge is wanting to see that that defendant is guilty of what he's been, accused of doing and convicted of doing, and that he's remorseful about those crimes.
Some of the money, I understand, can be recovered, so investors can get paid back. Is that part of the factoring in here? The money is not gone, it hasn't disappeared?
Well, they are going to try to recoup as much money as possible. It wasn't direct restitution. What the judge did was he made a forfeiture of about 11 billion, which is what the prosecution was asking for. That will give back to those individuals, the customers who were defrauded, and back to the investors the money that was taken when this fraud was committed. But the government will get that money, and the government can then determine who they will compensate. So it will sort of act as a distribution of the funds if they can recover it. Right now, it's not clear exactly how much Sam Bankman-Fried has as far as his assets are concerned. We know obviously there was a run on the company's FXX, and there isn't any money at the moment there. It doesn't seem to be. But if, in fact, Sam Bankman-Fried makes money in the future, that money's going to go right back to the government.
Do you think because he's young, there was some extra leniency put in place here because there's a possibility of rehabilitation considering he's young?
That's an excellent point, Marilla. I do think that that was factored in. I also think that they did use mitigating factors. They said the fact that he was on the autism spectrum. I think that, his mother was there. She did make a statement, and I think the judge took some of that into consideration. Obviously, he thinks about what he's going to do beforehand and writes that all out. But I do think that he considered the youth and the position of the individual and whether or not that person really was out to harm people. And don't forget, one of the things that Sam Bankman-Fried said was he was making this money to give back to the community, to very different, charities. So I think that might have factored in. On the other hand, I do think the judge thought that Fried knew what he was doing, that he knew he was, defrauding people. And so that's why I think he got a substantial sentence, but it was lessened by the fact that, there are these mitigating factors.